Good morning to Armando and Hossam and Anthony. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can.
Terrific. All right. We still have a minute or two before the official class starts. So we'll start in a few minutes.
All right, terrific.
And Anthony, I don't see your video yet.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can fix that. Should be coming through in just a moment.
Ah, there you are.
Okay. And I can't see either of the students.
Guys, do you mind, if you don't mind, will you go ahead and do a video feed? It's a little weird to talk to when you can't see the people you're talking to. So if you don't mind being live, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Can you guys see me right now, or? Because
No.
I can't see myself.
Is that Hossam speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, a blue line just appeared under your avatar, but I still can't see the video feed. I thought maybe the blue line indicated that it was trying to connect.
I think so. The blue line is for like the audio.
Oh, it is. Okay.
And Hossam, I just saw you also sent a question to Professor Orlando, so I'm going to go ahead and forward that right now while we're waiting for the meeting to start.
Yeah, sure. Do you guys have any idea how to open the camera? Because like there's a camera button down next to the audio, but it seems...
It should be, so that the camera button is, I think, just to show you're here, and then there's like a video recorder button, and that's the one you have to press to start a video.
Where is it located at?
It should be next to the microphone. And we have Philip joining us too. Good morning, Philip. And Sabrina, excellent. And Armando does not have a video feed for his computer, but Philip and Sabrina, we were asking if you wouldn't mind sharing your camera, just so that Professor Orlando kind of has faces that he's talking to instead of a blank screen. Hossam's trying to get his to work, but having a little trouble with the video feed.
It's not working so far. I'll keep trying while we go through it.
Yeah, just whatever you guys can do. Because from our end, probably what it looks like for Professor Orlando, it definitely looks like for me, it's me and him. Our images are up on the screen, and then 4 blank squares for the 4 students who are on right now, or I think soon to be 5 students.
I'm gonna try get out and like come back in and see how.
Okay, terrific, terrific. And Philip and Sabrina, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Terrific.
Hi.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, since we're at 11:10, I'm going to go ahead and start class. I think a few more students will probably pop in, and then of course the class is being recorded for the remainder of the students to watch afterwards and write their paper on. For those of you who were able to attend live, thank you. And Sabrina, we've got your image. Hello. That's awesome. Thank you. For everyone who, hopefully everyone can see him, this is Professor Orlando, and he is from the Western New England School of Law, and he is the Director of Admissions there. And he is here to tell you a little bit about what admissions officers look for when they are considering applicants, and also answer your questions about the law school application process. And I have had Professor Orlando speak to my capstone classes before, and he is an excellent resource for us. So with that, I will turn it over.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to connect with you guys today. Before I kind of launch into my spiel and the application process, I want to get a feel for what year, you guys juniors, seniors, are you sophomores? What year are we?
I'm a senior.
Senior.
Yes.
Senior? Okay. And are you guys all definitely looking at law school or considering it as a possibility perhaps in the future?
Yeah, I'm considering it.
Considering? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Or like get into political fields or something like that.
Okay, excellent. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of applying to law school and answering your questions, if you're considering law school, I definitely recommend trying to take advantage of some legal internships because that can solidify your interest perhaps in the law. And perhaps you do a legal internship in one area of law and you decide, nope, that's definitely not for me. But you have to keep an open mind that there are several different areas of law that you could practice in. So if you do an internship with a business law firm and it's not your interest, well, perhaps a public interest law-minded organization might be a good fit. So trying on several of those opportunities is good preparation to make sure that it's the right pathway for you before you apply to law school. And it also has that added benefit of being a resume builder. So when you do apply to law schools will see that you have those excellent experiences on your resume. Now, while that can make you more competitive, perhaps, as an applicant for admission, it's not absolutely necessary. So don't feel like you have to have that on your resume to get into law school. Of course, several applicants are working part-time jobs to support themselves through college and through law school as well. So doing an unpaid type internship might not be an option. But if you have that flexibility, perhaps for a few months during the semester or over the summertime, it can be a good experience to get your feet wet and confirm your interest in law before you apply, and again, be a good resume addition as well. So in terms of the process in applying to law school, one of the questions that I saw before was, what really makes an applicant stand out from another applicant? Which is a great question. Everybody wants to kind of improve their profile and really speak to the Board of Admissions. So myself and our process here is similar to a lot of other law schools in that we use a faculty committee. So there will be several people as part of the process, and each person is looking at something different in terms of their evaluation of the applicant. But I would say that you want to present a strong picture in 5 key areas. So that would be, in no particular order, and we can talk more about each one. You want to have a strong writing sample. The personal statement is the essay that you write as part of the application. And the personal statement should be a polished piece of writing that you spent some time with to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. So it shouldn't be the last thing that you write before you click submit. It's an essay that you've gone through different drafts of. You've had a professor or a trusted classmate or a family member read through and give you some feedback and make sure it's your best piece. Myself, I have one faculty member who's a legal research and writing professor, so she has a vested interest in knowing that she's picking some students for the class who are strong writers. So that's an important piece. The next piece of the application I'll mention, letters of recommendation. I always recommend reaching out to professors early in the process. So if you're going into your senior year, for example, I would reach out during the first couple of weeks of classes, approach your professors, be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation, and don't ask for it, by tomorrow or the following week. The professors have very busy schedules, so giving them a month or two to submit the letter of recommendation is a nice courtesy. But always ask if they're able to write a strong letter of recommendation because you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. It should be a professor that you have a close relationship with, who knows knows you pretty well, knows your ability as a student and your participation in the classroom, and can speak to that very strongly. And we ask for 2 letters of recommendation, but keep in mind that every law school is a little bit different. Some might ask for 3, some might ask for 1. We say 2, and at least 1 has to be from a professor. The next piece of the application, after your personal statement and letters of rec, I'll talk about your resume. So there's no big surprises here. Your resume should outline your academic history, but also your clubs and organizations that you're involved in. Law schools, just like colleges, are looking for actively involved students who will, enrich the life here at the law school. We're looking for students to get involved in Student Bar Association, which is the law school version of student government. So if you've been involved in student government, you want to highlight that on your resume. If you've been working to support yourself through law school or through undergraduate, that's important as well to list that work experience too.
Professor Orlando, sometimes students ask me if they should include jobs that really had nothing to do with the law, like jobs that were just to pay the bills, like waitressing or working in a clothing store. Do you want to see that too?
Yes, and I think the committee is interested in that because that lets us know that you were able to balance your academics with your work outside of school as well. So you might think, oh, it doesn't really pertain to law, it's not law related, it won't help me. Well, in fact, it's showing the committee that you were able to, balance your job with your academics, which can be impressive for them to see. So I think listing that on the resume is actually very helpful. So I would encourage students to do that for sure. Besides the personal statement, the letters of rec, and the resume, the two big ones that I get asked about all the time are the quantitative aspects of the application, the LSAT, and the GPA. And people love to focus on that because you can put a number on it. So it's easy to ask, what's a competitive LSAT score? What's a competitive GPA? And in fact, one of the questions that was sent over before our chat was, what's a good score for Western New England? So for us, last year, our median LSAT score was a 148. Our middle 50% range was a 146 to a 152. So again, that being our middle 50% range, that means that a full quarter of our class that was accepted and came scored below the 146. And a full quarter of our class that came was above that 152. So I tell people that middle 50% range, that 146 to 152, and that median of a 148, because it gives you a good target to shoot for when you're preparing for the LSAT. If you're not familiar with the test, it's kind of a weird scale. It's a 120 to a 180 scale. A 120 is just writing your name and nothing else, getting no questions correct. A 180 is a perfect score on the test, which is very hard to achieve. So I would think about the LSAT differently than you think about other tests you may have taken in the past. If you took the SAT or the ACT, although some people prepare for those tests with the review books or sometimes the class, not everybody does. But the LSAT is a test that you definitely should prepare for because you can get better at it. For most people, I would say 3 to 4 months is kind of the sweet spot where if you're studying, and your study schedule can vary depending, of course, on your flexibility with your schedule, but if you're studying over 3 or 4 months on a pretty regular basis, most people will see their score improve and improve. And then after 3 or 4 months, they'll plateau off, and they'll test pretty consistently in the same range. That's your range. So I tell people all the time, you should even know what your LSAT score is before you take the actual test. And that's because you practiced for so much time, and you've taken so many full-length timed practice tests, testing under real conditions, that you know what your score is. And that's really the key, is taking those full-length practice tests under timed conditions. If I had a dollar for every time I've heard a student say, oh, I ran out of time on one of the sections, I'd be a rich man. And usually that's because they studied for the test, but they didn't do it under those timed conditions. And when you set the clock and hold yourself up against that clock, you get a feel for exactly how much time you can spend per question before it's time to move on to the next one.
Professor Orlando, can I interrupt again?
Please do.
One thing, this is for the students, just so you know, the Legal Studies Department hosts practice LSAT tests under testing conditions, but you do have to sign up, and the sign-up sheets go quick, so you want to keep your eye out for that announcement when those are coming due. But you actually go in a room that's very similar to LSAT testing conditions. You can only bring in a few things. You got the time limitations, so it's free, and it's very helpful. And then I have a question, Professor Orlando. I remember a student from the last capstone asked this, and this comes up a lot to me, students ask how many times they should take the LSAT, because of course you can take it many, many times, how many times they should take it to improve their score before it starts looking, I guess, I don't know, desperate, for lack of a better word, to law school admissions committees?
Sure, it's a great question. So my first best advice is to prepare as well as possible for the first one. You don't want to take the LSAT cold. The fee, I think, is going up to, I think it's $200 for next year. They're increasing the fee again. So first off, it's an expensive test to take. So you want to prepare as best you can. In terms of multiple LSATs, that is one of those areas where each law school might handle that a little bit differently. So some law schools might take your best score. Some law schools might average multiple test scores. I know for us, we consider all scores that you submit as part of the review process. So, but if you're applying to multiple law schools, which most people do, say you're applying to 10 or 12 schools, and a few of those schools average the LSAT score, you definitely want to make sure that the first time you take the test, you're well prepared. Because say you take it one time and you score a 140, and then you study much, much more, and you go up to a 150 or higher. Well, those schools averaging will put you at a 145 or so, somewhere in the middle. So that really does work to your detriment if you're not well prepared. In terms of how many tests can you take before it starts to look a little bit like you're hoping for, the big one, that's a tough one. I usually tell students that ideally you take the test once, because again, you know what your practice range is. And when you take the actual test, if your score is in that practice range, you're probably happy with that score. If your score is above your practice range, you're ecstatic, you're over the moon. But if you're below your practice range, that's okay. You know that you were doing better on your practice tests, and you want to take it a second time because you can do better. You know that. So in that case, a second test or even a third test is fine. Once you start getting into 4 or 5 tests, it's not perhaps the best look as part of the application file. Again, every law school handles this a little bit differently, but with my committee, if they see multiple scores, there's usually not going to be too much improvement in those scores anyway. And even if there's a whole bunch of scores, say in the high 130s, and then all of a sudden it jumps to a 151 as the very last test, we're kind of wondering what happened there. Is this a student who was really testing pretty consistently down there? Is that the student that we're getting? Or did they not study for multiple tests and then all of a sudden they did study and now they're testing up here? So I would recommend, as part of the process, it's perfectly okay and in fact encouraged to write an addendum to your application talking about things like this, talking about your LSAT score, especially if there's several tests, or there is a jump in score or a drop in score. We actually see both. So those outside the norm things are helpful to discuss in addendum.
Professor Orlando, one thing with addendums that students ask me, and this is very common, students don't do so well their freshman or sophomore year at UCF, or they don't do so well in their general courses, which tend to be freshman, sophomore year. Then they, for whatever reason, kind of get it together and do very well in their major and their junior, senior year. And I've been asked, should I write an addendum to explain, basically I was 18 and I didn't focus on my studies and now I understand, and is that appropriate to write an addendum for that sort of thing?
Yes, and it's more than appropriate. I think it's almost necessary. And that gets into the fifth piece of the application, which is your transcript. In the transcript review, the committee will see all of your grades. They'll see your cumulative GPA and your degree GPA, but they'll also see each year of your undergraduate career. And we're looking at trends, and oftentimes we do see that trend that you mentioned where a student might start off a little bit slower in that transition to college. and perhaps they started off in the wrong program. I see many students who start off as a biology major on a pre-med track, and perhaps it's because they had some pressure to go into medicine from a family member, or perhaps they thought it was the best path for them, then found out, you know what, my interests are really more over here in the law, so I think I'll do that instead. And once they change majors, the GPA improves considerably. So we do see that as part of the process. The committee does look at trends, but it's helpful if you add that addendum to the application, giving us a more complete picture, because otherwise we're just looking at the numbers and we're kind of maybe filling in the narrative that, okay, they started off slow, they got acclimated to their school, their scores improved, and they're definitely on the upswing here in terms of their grades. But just telling the committee that is much more powerful. This is your chance to speak directly to law schools and tell your story. So it's not just your personal statement where you have a chance to talk to the committee and talk about why law school and why their law school is the great fit for you. But separately in that addendum, as a side issue, you want to talk about things like grade trends, or perhaps you were one of those students who you started off pretty strong, and then somewhere in sophomore or junior year there was a pretty significant dip in the GPA for whatever reason. Without an addendum talking about what may have contributed to that dip, the committee doesn't have that context, and it's helpful for us to have that. So perhaps it was a death in the family, perhaps you were ill for a semester, whatever it might be, giving us that information to paint a clear picture is very helpful. And you can submit several addenda to the application. There's the opportunity to write one about diversity and what kind of diversity you bring to the class, which can of course be diversity of background, it could be ethnic, socioeconomic, diversity of thought. We're looking for students with all different types of backgrounds that bring a lot to the classroom environment. So that's an opportunity as well to talk more about what you bring to the table. But any of these kind of areas that you were talking about, it is helpful to tell your story, because otherwise we don't really have that context.
Doctor, sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry for the camera too. I have an important question, which I usually ask my classmates about. There's a prep course that prep you for the law school for the LSAT exam,
Mm-hmm.
and there's two types of students. Some students say there's a 3-month course that you take it through 3 months, and other students say there's a 4-day course that comes a week before the exam, and it's every day for 4 hours.
Okay.
And so they have different opinions whether you should practice well right before the exam so you won't forget, or you should take it on a long period of time. So what do you suggest in that case?
Wow. Well, that 4-day course, that sounds really interesting to me. That sounds like the difference between studying for a class throughout the semester and cramming for a final exam.
It does.
That's
Yeah.
what it sounds like to
Yeah.
me. So I'll preface this by saying that you know you better than anybody else does, and we all learn a little bit differently. So with that in mind, I would choose your study methods based on what's worked for you in the past. I tell students all the time to kind of diversify their study methods a little bit. One thing that I recommend is, it's called Khan Academy. Khan is spelled Khan, Khan Academy. And Khan Academy it's free LSAT test prep that's online. It was actually developed in partnership with the Law School Admission Council, the same people who administer the law school admissions test. They spent 2 years recycling old LSAT questions into this online test prep. And not only is it free and online, so it's easy to access, but it's personalized. So as you go through more and more tests, it gives you remedial work on your weaker areas. It's almost the equivalent of having one of these review classes that you had to pay for in the past. But I love the fact that it levels the playing field, because not everybody can afford that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because it's free and it's the equivalent of that, I think it's a great resource. But I get nervous when I hear about the 4-day crash course test to get ready for the LSAT. I think studying longer over a longer period of time will help to really reinforce the concepts and the tricks that you're learning to get better and faster at the test. But again, you know you the best. Maybe you try several different study methods. Maybe you do Khan Academy online, but you also do that 4-day crash course at the end to solidify some concepts that you learned. Some people do best when they have just an old LSAT review book and they study at their own pace. But even if you do that, I will come back to the most important thing I can recommend is doing at least one full-length timed practice test per week in the last 4 weeks that you're studying for the LSAT. That's a time commitment, obviously, because it's a, I believe, 3-hour test or so. So you have to find some time to set aside 3 hours on a weeknight. That's hard. Perhaps on a weekend is more flexible, but doing one full-length timed test per week for 4 weeks before the test, at a minimum, is what you should be doing, I would say.
Can you all see? I pulled up the Khan Academy. Can you guys see that on your screens?
Not really.
I can't see that either.
I can't see it.
Okay. I'll keep fiddling with it. And maybe it'll pop up while Professor Orlando's talking.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention too is the timing of the process. So I mentioned, the 5 key components of the process that we look at as a committee, but timing-wise, I really strongly recommend that if you're, say, getting into your senior year, that you start the process in the fall, not just in terms of reaching out for letters of recommendation to give your professors plenty of time to submit those, but also because most law school admissions offices have more flexibility in terms of the decisions they make earlier on in the cycle. Ooh, I can see the Khan Academy screen now.
There we go. I'll leave it up for a couple minutes while you speak.
Okay. So if you apply in the fall, and think of admissions as a 1-year out process. So for example, for fall 2019, this coming fall, the entering class, the application went live back in September of 2018. So you're always kind of looking ahead by a year. So this fall on September 1st, our application for September 2020 will go live. And you have a chance to submit your materials, you have the chance to sit for the LSAT, and if things don't go as well as you would have liked on the fall LSAT, then you'll get your score back and still have time to register for the winter test. It's now offered 9 times a year, which is much better than the 4 times per year that it used to be offered. So you have more testing dates and options. But again, admissions offices might be able to say yes to an applicant if they apply in the fall or the winter, whereas if they apply later on in the spring, they might not have that flexibility for an admit decision for a student with similar credentials, because they're taking a close look at the numbers as they get later on in the process, and they're seeking to improve their LSAT profile and their GPA. And even though they may have admitted some students with some lower credentials earlier on that had great writing samples and a great resume, they might not be able to take those same LSAT and GPA scores later on in the cycle. So it really does pay off to apply early if you can. I wanted to get into some of the other questions. I'm just taking a look here at my phone because I had forwarded those questions here.
Sure. I can also read some of them off to you if that helps.
Yeah, that would be great. Please.
Okay. So, I think Hossam already asked his question live, and then we had an email question from Armando. He sent a couple questions. I'm going to combine them, because a couple of them. He wanted to know how many credit hours are required for a JD, and if there were 2-year programs offered. And I think those kind of tie together a bit. You might want to explain perhaps ABA accreditation for law schools.
Yeah, sure. So there are just over 200 law schools in the U.S. that are accredited by the American Bar Association, or the ABA. Western New England is one of those schools. The great thing about accreditation is that if you go to an ABA accredited law school, you have the flexibility of sitting for the bar exam in any jurisdiction. So you can go to law school in Massachusetts and sit for the bar in Florida. You can go to law school in California and sit in Texas. You really have that flexibility, which is great. In terms of the credit hours, it can vary from law school to law school. For us, we require 88 credits to graduate. Some law schools might be around 90 or maybe a few credits less, but around the high 80s is pretty typical. But there'll be some requirements within that. So, for example, we have 6 credit hours must be experiential learning. Experiential learning means that you're working as a student attorney in a clinic, and we have 9 on-campus clinics in different areas from immigration to small business to criminal law. Or if you're not at one of the 9 on-campus clinics, we have over 100 externship sites in our area, which is in Springfield, Massachusetts. So most law schools are similar in that they have lots of opportunities for students to get their feet wet with clinics, with externships, and practice as a student attorney to not only build their resume and make themselves more competitive for a job, but also to confirm that that area of law really is their interest. Because sometimes the book study of law can be different from the actual practice of law. The last thing you want to do is take a whole bunch of courses in a certain area and then graduate and say, okay, I'm going to study now in this area, and find out actually practicing is totally different from just studying it. And I'll use a quick example of estate planning. I myself really enjoyed estate planning in law school. That's where you deal with wills and powers of attorney and healthcare proxies and trusts. As a class, it was very interesting to me because you deal with some famous cases. For example, Marilyn Monroe's estate is a pretty famous case that you will tackle in that class. That's intrinsically interesting because it's Marilyn Monroe. It has that intrigue value. But after I graduated from law school and I was practicing, and I practiced mostly in business law, real estate, and estate planning, when I was doing my estate planning, I found out pretty quickly that most estate plans can be very dry and boring. For most people, a very basic will and power of attorney and healthcare proxy is all they need. And it doesn't really take a whole lot of creative thought on your end as an attorney to draft these documents. A lot of it is cut and paste, to be honest. So with more complex estates, there might be the requirement for different trust vehicles to protect those assets, and that does involve more creative drafting on your part as an attorney. But for the most part, it can be very, very dull, or at least that was my impression. Some people love estate planning, but for me, it was much, much different from the course in law school. So I use that as an example just to highlight why it's so important for you when you're in law school to try on these different areas of law for size and make sure you're interested by doing clinics and externships. The second part of that question, though, besides the credits, was about kind of accelerated programs, talking about 2 or 2.5 year options. Some law schools do offer an accelerated pathway to earn a JD, either 2 or 2.5 years. Western New England does not have one of those programs. We feel that it's more advantageous to the student to have it over 3 years full-time or 4 years part-time, because it lends to more opportunity to do those clinics and externships that I mentioned before. So although it is possible under ABA guidelines to have this accelerated pathway and earn your JD in 2 years, keep in mind that it might limit your opportunities to get involved in those externship opportunities and build your resume, which can be important to find a job afterwards.
Professor Orlando, I have an important question, which I want to study international law, but I think so. What I understood that in United States, there's not a specific major as international law, because a lot of professors recommended me to go to United Kingdom for that, and I'm an international student. So is that a good thing, a bad thing, or does it matter?
Is it a good thing or a bad thing that you're an international student, or to practice in that area of law?
Both. I'm an international student, and is there a major specifically for international law?
Yeah, so for us, we actually have 7 different concentration areas, and one of those is international and comparative law. So when you're looking at law schools, I definitely recommend to check out whether that law school has the concentration area that interests you. And law schools might term these different things. For us, we call them concentrations. Other law schools might call them pathways, or they might even call them majors, using an undergraduate terminology. But if a law school has this focus, this concentration or pathway in a certain area of law, what that just means is they have lots of classes, clinical programs and externships, and other on-campus programs to support saying that they offer that. So, for example, we have that concentration here at Western New England in international and comparative law, but we also have a clinical program in international human rights. And that's a key opportunity for students to participate in that clinic and work on some very important cases, human rights abuses around the world. So that's run right here through our campus in that clinic. And we also have lots of externships here in the Springfield, Massachusetts area that involve international law opportunities. So again, I recommend when you're looking at law schools, if you know that you want to practice in a certain area like international law, like business law, like criminal law, make sure it's offered as a concentration at that school, because that means they'll have the programs to really support your interest in that area of law. And I think, yes, being an international student definitely poses an advantage there, because you're already perhaps more familiar with the systems in other countries than a domestic student might be.
Professor Orlando, we're getting closer to the end of the class time, so is it all right with you if I open it up generally to questions?
Yes, that would be great.
All right, so guys, you can either use your microphones or type it in the chat box. I see someone typing right now, and of course, feel free to just speak your questions too. And oh, there was one more question that came in via email. I'll do that while Ashley's typing. And I apologize. I think you may have already answered this while I was checking the questions. Did you already answer, are there online classes?
Oh, no, I had not.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so for us, we are starting actually for this coming fall. We're starting a online kind of hybrid program for our part-time evening students. So we offer a 3-year full-time option, but also a 4-year part-time, either part-time evening or part-time day. Part-time evening is much more popular because if you're going to law school part-time, it's usually because you have a day job or other day obligations. But with the hybrid part-time evening schedule, it'll be Mondays and Wednesdays here at the law school, an in-class meeting, and then Thursdays will be online. So roughly 1/3 of the courses will be delivered online, and I think that's a major advantage, especially to students who are commuting in from further away. So we do have students who are down in the Hartford, Connecticut area, which is a half an hour to 45 minutes away. Other students actually commute in from over an hour away. So, being on campus 2 nights a week and being able to sign in online during a live synchronous class, you log in at the same time as your peers and your classmates. So it's still a rigorous program with some back and forth. That's, I think, a good opportunity for our students. In the full-time section, we don't currently have the online delivery during the day, although I will say after your first year of classes, and the full-time classes meet during the day, after that, for your second and third year of law school in the full-time section, you do have the option of doing a combination of day classes and night classes. So you might choose one of those part-time evening night classes that has the online option too. So that is an option as part of the part-time, or sorry, as part of the full-time program, but after your first year.
Great. And we did get a question in from Ashley. She wrote, "Hello, do you think personality types can play a role in excelling in law school, as in a shy or an outspoken person?"
I think that's a fantastic question. And there are several different types of roles that you can play as an attorney. So sometimes people fall into this stereotype of, oh, if you're going to be an attorney, you have to be super outgoing and be comfortable talking in front of an audience because you're going to be in front of a courtroom litigating a big case. And that's true for some attorneys, but not everybody goes into litigation. There are many people who prefer to get into transactional law, doing contracts and drafting documents, and that's an important area of law as well, where you might not be, on the stage, if you will, of a courtroom, and perhaps that's because you're more of a naturally shy or reserved person, so you decide to go into a different area of law. Perhaps you like working with smaller groups of people, and you're kind of a peacemaker, and you want to get into resolving conflicts. Right now, what they call ADR, which is alternative dispute resolution, this is mediation, arbitration, negotiation. These areas of law are very much in demand, and that suits another personality type. So I think there really are law jobs out there for all different types of people. I do believe that, yes, personality types can play a role in excelling in certain areas of law. If you want to be a litigator, you have to be comfortable being in front of a panel of people, your jury or your judges, and that's a certain type of person, I feel like. And you can practice that skill and get better at it too. So if you're shy right now, that doesn't mean that you're going to go into doc review or transactional law necessarily. I know a lot of my peers, my classmates, when I was in law school, they came into law school thinking, I'm going to do this area of law for sure, whatever it was, business law or criminal law. And then they got involved in different clubs and organizations. Perhaps they went out for a mock trial or a moot court competition team, and they fell in love, and that kind of changed their whole pathway. So to the broad question, does personality type play a role in excelling in law school? No, because all different types of people can excel in law school, but your personality type might play a big factor in what type of law you decide to go into eventually.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Professor, just one last question. What are the most on-demand law majors, I can say, or what is the market really want right now in this time period?
No, it's a great question. So I would say that there's always a need for criminal law attorneys. Having good prosecutors and public defenders in the system is very important. So there's always a need for that. Business law is always in demand to a certain extent. I think intellectual property or IP law is a growing sector right now, so that would be a good area to get into if you have interest in trademark and copyright and those types of areas. And again, I think there's a big growing focus on alternative dispute resolution, getting into that mediation or negotiation or arbitration. The court systems right now are clogged, and there's a backlog of cases for months in some cases. So if you have the opportunity to resolve a dispute outside of our very clogged legal system, that's certainly a plus. So you can actually get certified as a mediator while you're here at Western New England, and I would assume the same is true at other law schools. Having that certification and that practice of bringing people together to resolve disputes is certainly a growing sector of the legal field right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, Professor Orlando, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your time today. And of course, if students are interested, Professor Orlando is certainly available. I'm going to volunteer you to answer questions specifically about Western New England School of Law. He is the director of admissions, so he is a wonderful resource if you want to go to school somewhere where you get out of the Florida heat. And you get to experience a lot of different clinics. And I hope everyone saw the webpage when I pulled it up. I had it up for a little bit, but if you do want to learn more, you're welcome to email me or email Professor Orlando.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If I could make two more super quick points. Number one, always reach out to law schools and kind of get in their database, if you will. So, for example, many law schools like mine keep track of every time that we have a connection with a prospective student. So if your school is hosting a law fair, even if you're already on that law school's mailing list or email list, go and chat with the person from that law school, the rep at that table. That might be me, it might be, one of my colleagues, but always go and fill out one of those informational cards again, because what happens is the law school will put you into their system as, oh, okay, well, I saw Sabrina at the UCF event when I came to visit. And then if she were to call or to email, every contact goes as part of your file. And when it comes time for the admissions committee to look at your file, they're going to have a record of how interested you are in that program. So always try to make as many contacts with these law schools as you can throughout the process. And even if they have your information, always fill out one of those cards or type in the information on their laptop at the event, because it can really pay dividends in terms of them knowing that you're interested. And the last thing I just wanted to say is please feel free to share my email address with the students. I'm happy to be a resource for all of you as you continue your exploration into law school as the right path for you. So I'm happy to share my email address. It's just first name dot last name, which is Anthony.Orlando, just like that city down there in Florida. Anthony.Orlando@law.wne.edu. And I really am always happy to help with any questions that you have, so please feel free to reach out. And hopefully I'll see you guys at the UCF Fair next year when I'm there. Sometimes I visit in the fall if there's a good event going on, but I know always in the spring, I believe it's either February or March, the PAD group, Phi Alpha Delta at UCF, puts on a good fair as well. So I'd be happy to see you guys at that event next year as well.
Thank you for answering your question. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Guys, if I could do two class items, these are very quick. First, a couple students have emailed me for Westlaw passwords. I am working on that, and just keep your eyes open. Check your junk mail for an email directly from Thompson Rutgers. I always say it wrong. So keep an eye out for that. It'll come sometime this week. And the second thing is in regard to the Blue Book training. So far, I've only had 2 students send me emails that they would be interested in a class like that. If it remains just the 2 students, I'm probably just going to work with those 2 students directly rather than set up a whole class. But I'm going to wait and see this week if a few more students express interest in a training of that type.
Interesting, Doctor.
So just remember, shoot me an email, okay? Because that's how I'm keeping track of the interest. And if you've already sent me an email, you don't need to send another. But right now, I just have 2 students. Okay?
Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Sabrina, thank you so much for sharing your video so it wasn't just Professor Orlando and me. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.